In just the past 2 weeks, Gold's Gym, JCPenney, and Neiman Marcus have all filed for bankruptcy. And unfortunately, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Many more companies are going to be filing bankruptcy over the next few months. And in this video, I'm going to break down exactly what that means for these companies. So like I mentioned, we're going to be talking about business bankruptcy in this video. Now there are several different kinds of bankruptcy. There's special bankruptcies for farmers, there's bankruptcy for individuals, but we'll mostly be covering the two main business type filings for bankruptcy in the US in this video. Now many people are actually confused, and they hear when a company goes through bankruptcy, they think that means the company is gone forever, they're never going to be able to do business again, and that's not really the case in one of these scenarios. There's a lot of confusion around it, so we'll go ahead and break it down in this video. Now there's two main types of bankruptcy filing for businesses in America. There's Chapter 11, known as Reorganization, and Chapter 7, known as Liquidation. Now, if you don't know, they're all written down in a book, and different chapters cover different types of bankruptcies. That's basically why they just refer to them as the chapter. Chapter 11 covers this. Chapter 7 covers this, but we'll cover these main two. We're going to start with Chapter 11 because it kind of leads into Chapter 7. So Chapter 11 happens basically when a company has too much debt versus how many assets they have, and there's just no way they can ever pay down the debt that they have. So they go into bankruptcy, and that prevents any further interest accruing on the debt that they have, and they can work with the court system and the creditors that they owe money to and potentially pay down their debt. Now, the creditors, the court system will actually decide what kind of decrease in the debt that they owe will happen to that company. So potentially the court system could decide, basically, we're just going to cut out all of your interest. You still have to pay all the debt. And then once all the debt is paid back to the creditors, you leave bankruptcy. But in certain scenarios, potentially even the debt that they have is just too much money. They won't be able to pay it back. And the court systems can actually crunch the debt and say that the company only has to pay back maybe 75 or 50% of the debt that they own to the creditors. And once they pay back the 50% or so, they're completely debt-free. They can leave bankruptcy and continue on with their business. Now, obviously, this isn't the best case scenario for the creditors, but it's actually a better scenario than if the company were to file Chapter 7. So in many cases, the creditors are happy to get back at least a portion of the money that they were owed to these businesses. Now, one thing I want to point out, pretty much every business that files for bankruptcy will initially file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. However, the court system can decide later on, they'll look at their debt, and if they have too much debt, they can actually shift a company to Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Now, Chapter 11 bankruptcy was designed to keep businesses together, to be able to make them potentially be profitable again. That's why it's there. It's made to protect companies. And many companies over the years have actually filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, gone through the bankruptcy process, and come out the other end as profitable companies. So several of them were GM. You know GM, they're the car manufacturer. In 2008, they filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. They paid down their debt and they came out of bankruptcy, and they are a profitable company right now. I don't know in 2020, based on everything that's going down, if they're profitable right now, but they were profitable for the past several years. Marvel, many people don't know Marvel Entertainment, the comic books, with all the superheroes, before they were bought with Disney back in the 90s, they actually declared bankruptcy as well. They went through the bankruptcy process, came out the other end, were a profitable company, and then they were bought by Disney years later. And then Six Flags as well. Six Flags owns many amusement parks all across the US. They also declared bankruptcy several years ago, and since then have come through bankruptcy and are now a profitable company again. Now, one thing that I do want to mention, while Chapter 11 bankruptcy is there to protect companies, companies really should only go through bankruptcy as a last resort. And basically that's because after they go through bankruptcy, more companies, more lenders are very unlikely to lend money to these companies because they know those companies are not financially stable. They know they just got through a bankruptcy, and so they're very unwilling to lend future credit to these companies going forward. And if they do lend credit, it will be much higher interest rates. So generally, you don't want to go through a bankruptcy unless you absolutely have to, if you have to save the company, to lower your debt by going through bankruptcy. But if you go through Chapter 11, you can become a profitable company after. Now let's talk about the second one, and that is Chapter 7, known as Liquidation bankruptcy. Now this is the type of bankruptcy that you absolutely want to avoid as a company. Basically, this means that all of your assets will be sold off. We all know Toys R Us, they went out of business several years ago. Toys R Us is a company that went through Chapter 7 bankruptcy, and basically that means all of their assets were sold off, whether that be all the toys in their store as well as all of the stuff in their offices as well. So like, let's say they had a forklift in their back supply center where they get supplies, you know, from the trucks, and they load it on, they have forklifts. They would have to sell those forklifts to potentially pay off the creditor as well, and their offices as well. So maybe they have a main headquarters where they have desks and computers and chairs. All of that, everything is sold off in a liquidation to potentially pay back the debtors, get as much money into the creditor's hands, because the company has basically no money to give these creditors to pay off their debt. So everything the company owned, whether that be property rights, anything, buildings, everything is sold, liquidated to pay off the creditor. So basically that means the company no longer exists if they go through a Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Now, one thing I want to point out, most companies do not initially file for a Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Most of them will file for a Chapter 11. That's what Toys R Us did. They initially filed a Chapter 11, and then the court systems decided that they were a completely broke company. They were massively in debt. They were hemorrhaging money every single month, and there's no way that this company could ever be profitable again. So the court system said, nope, we're switching you over to a Chapter 7. We're liquidating all your assets. You're going away completely. Now, in many cases, in a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, even if a company goes out of business, they'll potentially still have assets that are worth money. It's not enough money to keep the company afloat, but these assets they have could be profitable down the line. One example of that is a company called Interstate Bakeries. Interstate Bakeries owned several different companies. One of the companies that they owned was the brand Hostess. Hostess makes Twinkies, Ding Dongs, all those fun snacks. You may have heard a few years ago, people were saying, Hostess, they're going bankrupt. Actually, the company that owned them, Interstate Bakeries, was the company that was going bankrupt, but they still had profitable assets like Hostess, and what happened was they ended up selling in liquidation. Interstate Bakeries went into liquidation, and they sold Hostess and all of the rights to all of their products, Twinkies and Ding Dongs. They sold them to another company, and now this other company is actually making Hostess products and selling all of those products. So Hostess is owned by another company now, and they actually make plenty of money. But that's what happens in a liquidation. Your assets, if you have anything of value, will be sold off to another company, and then those other companies or creditors can use those assets however they see fit. Now, one thing I want to point out, like I did say earlier, pretty much every company when they file for bankruptcy will file a Chapter 11. So all of these companies that recently filed, Gold's Gym, Neiman Marcus, JCPenney, they all filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and that doesn't technically mean they're going to go away forever. If you are interested in these companies, you need to keep an eye on them, because as long as they're in Chapter 11, potentially they can reopen and go on fine with their business. But if they do end up switching their filing to a Chapter 7, if you hear they switch their filing, basically means that they're going out of business. All of their assets will be sold off, and you'll never hear from these companies again. So there you go. Those are the two main types of bankruptcy filings for business: Chapter 11 reorganization and Chapter 7 liquidation. I hope you found this video interesting. If you did, be sure and leave a like and subscribe. We will have more great content coming up soon. Thanks everyone, and have a fantastic day.